All right, looks like we do have a quorum of advisory members, so I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. First off, can I get anyone from advisory to volunteer to take minutes tonight? No takers, no takers.
Steve, I'll take minutes. I think it's my turn around.
All right, thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
So the meeting is called to order at 7:02 p.m. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee public meeting, Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. First roll call. So far we have, let's see, myself, Stephen Tsai, Peter Galatano, Drew Kashal, Jane Matarazzo, Mark Albers, Steve Leahy, and we're missing a couple of people, but I think we'll move on to the reading of the agenda. So first, addition of topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting. I have nothing to add to the agenda. Does anybody else from advisory have any topics to add? All right, hearing none. We then will have follow-up items, liaison reports as needed, and then current meeting items. We are discussing the capital fund, which I believe has been withdrawn from the warrant by the DPW director, but just kind of a general conversation about the DPW town building budgets, both this year and moving forward. And then the select board and legal budgets with David Williams, the town administrator. The police department budget with Chief Dave Bento. Discussion of the revaluation with the assessor, Wendy Alassi. Then an addition from Daryl Beardsley on the Board of Health requesting for additional budget. And then a new warrant article from the planning board, and I believe the town planner, Gino Carlucci, will be presenting that to us. It's for an easement for the rail trail. Then approval of previous meeting minutes, and then adjourned meeting. Does anybody from advisory have any questions or comments about the agenda? Nope. All right, so then I guess we will move on to liaison reports. Does anybody from advisory have any reports from any of the other boards and committees that you're liaisons for? All right, I believe that's a no. All right, so then on to our first meeting item, and that is Sean Colleen regarding the sort of capital planning primarily for town buildings, but I also wanted to see if you had any updates or changes to either your DPW or town buildings operating budgets before we get into capital. You're muted, Sean.
Apologies. I don't have any change other than the significant change of we as you stated, we knocked out that other article.
Yeah.
But it is being replaced by the traditional town buildings article.
Right.
So if your warrant is old, if your warrant checklist is old, it doesn't show right. Although I don't know if you have the most recent update from capital budget, but I went over it with Joe last Friday. I mean, it's unchanged so far with the projects and the scope layout, but we took away the replacement reserve article and just called it the town buildings article.
Yeah. Yeah, so the latest draft of the warrant that I have does, it no longer shows the capital reserve fund. And now I've got town buildings and facilities in as item 3 for capital improvement in the amount of 430,000, which I believe that's the same as it was previously, right?
Right. So we just moved it down on the checklist
Okay.
from where it had been with the creation of that article.
Okay. So I guess this is the main thing that I wanted to talk, with you about, but also sort of as a more general advisory discussion, right? It brings up the ongoing issue of the capital projects for town buildings versus things that really should be operating, and that $430,000 presumably combines different aspects, like things from the on-site insight report, right? But some of those things individually do qualify as capital, and then some of them individually maybe do not, right? But then we're sort of grouping them together as larger projects, which then therefore do technically qualify as capital. And that's the thing that we're mostly wondering: do we need to shift this strategy moving forward? Does that sound accurate, John?
Yes. And I think we were definitely headed in that direction. It should definitely shift. This wasn't the year for me to try to do it with coming off of what we've been through the past year. But long term, going out, we shouldn't. I've said for a long time, and I think you agreed, we shouldn't be funding our operations with capital articles year after year after year after year. And so, there's several ways to look at it. The cleanest way to look at it would be some tables that Peter did off of the on-site insight reports we did this year. This year we did a refresh on those reports because they were 5 years old. And I mean, it basically says the same thing. There's a lot of nickel dime things, boiled up in there that as they stand alone, or sometimes even as you group them, they're still operating budget stuff. So I didn't go to make that move, and I understand it's probably not going to happen today.
Right.
But we probably should. I think it's a valid discussion to have now, so that next year, as we go to start the budget, we should take a stab at it and start with that. That way, it's in the model. If it seems a little over the top, we pull it back. I got a little preoccupied with trying to do the marrying the library budget in, and trying to keep that as clean as it could be, because I thought it was the right thing to do. I knew it was going to add some confusion. I think it netted out pretty good, so that we're not showing any double costs or anything.
Yeah, I think we tried to do a pretty good job of tracking where library things came off of library and went into town buildings, and I think they did match up.
Right, and I mean, still some of that is predictive anyway. It's a building we don't actually have yet, so some of those costs are unknown. Some of them are pretty well fixed, but
so when I look at this chart that Peter came up with, there's, if we skip this year, if we look at 2022 and we look at the on-site insights breakdown of projects, ones that are capital versus operating. So in 2022, the grand total lists 40,000 in capital and 45,000 in operating. 2023 is 386,000 in capital, 47 in operating. 2024 is 21,000 in capital and 69,000 in operating. Now moving forward, just operating, we've got 89,000, then the following year 98,000, the following year 50,000, 45,000. So generally, it seems like going by, and in some of these years, you'll have big capital projects that spike up into the six figures, and then some years are leaner. But it does seem like year over year, the operating items seem to be in that $45,000 to $100,000 range. So if you were to just say, let's just whole hog starting next year, put all of the operating things into operating for town buildings, do you feel like that's what we should be expecting in terms of your increased budget request for town buildings? We'll basically just track with what this chart is showing in the operating. So $50,000 to $100,000 each year, higher than our current baseline.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, it's hard to go back. It would take a ton of work to try to go back and say, all right, what'd you do the past 4 years? And pull every warrant out and pull each sheet out. But just an easy way to look at it is there's a fair amount of expected things that we need to do that just don't rise to that level. Now, for a decade, we didn't do them. We also had much newer buildings. As we know, we picked one decade to replace all the buildings or rehab them all. So a lot of the smaller items just don't happen the first 10 years. And then the flip side is the unexpected occurrences. Like we had one this year with the sprinkler system. Those do rise to capital, and you can't always appropriate well for them. But they tend to be somewhat consistent as the buildings age. You just can't always pinpoint which building and where it's going to be. But we know we've been doing a fair amount of that operating budget with the capital. Because it just doesn't fit in a bucket that was funded enough. And we, you know, as everyone here knows, we haven't been doing $100,000 reserve fund transfer for the town buildings. And that's partially because there's been the warrant article each year to draw from. We probably want to get away from that a little bit. I think if people looked back and looked at the number of items, they'd probably say, well, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be spending, there was 5 big items in a what we thought was a warrant article, and you spent it on 15 different things. That's not really the intent, but that's what we've been doing. So the long answer is, to get to the short answer, I think somewhere between 50 and 100 is what we should try to target for next year, added into the operating overall for the buildings.
And now looking at this year, there's obviously a much larger number. It's 265,000 in operating. My assumption is that reflects the fact that we haven't really been following the on-site insight recommendations for the past 5 years. And is that basically catch up for what we haven't been doing, or is that something different?
Yeah, the first year out of the 0 year always backlogs a bunch of stuff. It's still going to categorize it the same. But if they show overdue, they're going to show this year. It doesn't mean you're going to get them done in a fiscal year, but we don't we don't expect these articles to close in that same fiscal year either. So that's why both, the combination of the two does show high. But again, as you stack that many operating things together, then you actually start to look like it looks like some of those do fit into the capital.
Yeah.
Because you stack 5 years worth of operating or 5 years worth of small items in.
Can I ask a clarifying question on this whole operating versus capital issue? Because I think we all are. I think we're in agreement that we don't want to mischaracterize things. But if I'm not mistaken, I thought the on-site insight report characterized everything in its report as capital needs for the town.
No.
Well, it says capital needs right at the top of the report. So that's what they're calling it anyway. Now, I'm assuming that means that they have some basis for determining that even if they wouldn't necessarily be considered by the town of Sherborn as capital needs, or shouldn't be, or whatever we want to decide, that they believe you could legitimately call those capital needs, call all of them capital needs. And then
Well, no,
I know the town of Sherborn, well, the town of Sherborn I know has a $10,000, if it's $10,000, it's capital, and if it's below, it's not. So we've made a decision that, that's how we're going to categorize things. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that your spreadsheet did make that effort to break down what was below 10,000 and what was above 10,000. And that's how we're now coming up with an operating versus capital determination. But I guess I have a grounding question, which is, is it necessarily clear what is operating and what is capital? And are we just saying, well, for the town of Sherborn, the standard is $10,000 and that's what we're going to go by? Or is it possible, especially, as we've said many times in an era of low interest rates, that, if these things can be legitimately categorized as capital, is it such a bad idea to call them that and handle it on a capital basis? It's kind of a grounding question as to whether, what is operating, what is capital, and maybe that's not so crystal clear. And maybe we have a lot of, wiggle room, if you will, to make those determinations. I'm just throwing that out there for discussion, I guess.
Jane, this is Dave Williams. How are you?
I'm good, Dave. How are you?
Good, thanks. It's in the bylaws that specifies what that threshold is. I think it's $10,000 and a life of 5 years, at least minimum 5 years. So whatever the town chooses to define as a capital project is you just have to set it in the bylaw. So the dollar amount could go up, or the number of years for the project could go up, but we generally think of a capital project, anything that's not a service related procurement, everything else is going to be a capital project, whether it's horizontal construction or vertical construction, or so that's how I think of things, as in the procurement sense, as to delineate them. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah,
Does that mean that so I'm just to try to clarify Jane's question, does that mean that on-site insight is simply not defining capital in the same way that the town of Sherborn is defining capital?
I would say that.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some things, we didn't give them the guidance because at the time we were thinking that there was going to be a short, like a run-up of a couple of years of things that were really maintenance type things, but really that we caused them, and we were looking that they could be bundled or rolled up into something that would qualify as capital projects. But that doesn't mean it's going to qualify as a capital project again. So I think that that's what we were expecting from the beginning, that there would be these maintenance items that would be treated as capital but not continue as capital.
Looking at the report, there are things that could be procured in bulk that are labeled as operating because they fall under the bylaws. Yet if Sean went out to buy flooring for 3 buildings or a painting contractor for 2 buildings, the sum total of that vendor could trip capital for the 10,000. So yes, Jane, you correctly described, well, A, you're always right, and B, you correctly described the on-site insight spreadsheet and what defined capital and operating. And so each year, Sean and other department heads have to look at it and say, what are we going to call capital and what are we going to call operating? It's a guide.
helpful because I didn't realize that there was a specific bylaw that set this out. I thought it was, a generic policy. I did not realize it was incorporated in the bylaws.
I sent it to Jane, so you can check that out.
Thank you.
Sure.
But still, it does mean then, based, I guess, on what Peter is saying, that in any given year, we're not taking this spreadsheet that he has generated as gospel necessarily. That there's, like, Sean could go into, let's say, the 2024 chart and say, okay, so we've got all these things, but we could bundle certain things together because the police building and the fire station both need the same thing, and we can group those together and call it capital. So in a year where the operating line, according to Peter's spreadsheet, might be 100,000, I guess theoretically Sean might be able to go in there and figure out that, okay, well, some of those things that Peter categorized as operating could reasonably actually be a capital project, and thereby basically try to buffer that variance in the town building's operating budget. Does that sound kind of accurate?
Yeah. I got to caution you, though. There's a difference between playing around with a spreadsheet and actually doing the work. We're bound by public procurement laws. So while it sounds nice to sit here and try to bundle a bunch of stuff in a spreadsheet together, that would be an insane amount of work to try to bundle work across buildings just so I can go out to public procurement and have to put things out to bid. I mean, you'd be adding significant costs and oversight. No one in their right mind would actually do that. If you need to go paint the soffits at town hall, you just paint the soffits at town hall. If it's a $5,000 project, it's not a capital project. It needs to be done. There's caulking around the windows that needs to be done. If you continually put stuff off until you hit the $10,000 threshold, then you have to hire an architect. You need to put up bid specs. You need to advertise it and put it out to public bid, and it might triple the cost. There is maintenance items that are in the spreadsheet that just are maintenance items. We've chosen over the years to underfund it and not do it, but that's not going to change. The spreadsheet does a really good job of showing that, I think. I mean, if you just look at Peter's pivot or his summary, there's a handful of items here, even across all the buildings, that equal in the hundreds. And, some of those may or may not be reflected in the budget right now, but most of them aren't. Most of them are things that need to get done that, they may or may not get done this year, but they're not covered in the operating budget. That's mostly testing and utility bills and a few other things.
My last question before we kind of put this out into broad discussion. So for this year, the On-Site Insight report lists $499,000 worth of stuff, and your capital request is $430,000. So what is that? The $70,000 that you've removed from it? What is the nature of those things?
That was actually a number. I still owe my final breakdown of this isn't going to look like that spreadsheet, but I had promised that to Joe for tomorrow's meeting. The odd thing is you guys are actually running meetings, it seems like in reverse order, because capital budget's meeting tomorrow night. So I think I had that number before we totaled up the On-Site Insight report, so they don't exactly jive. Again, I didn't build my number off of this Peter's pivot tables and stuff. They're really good display, but
okay. So I know you can't predict the future, but do you think after tomorrow's meeting with capital budget that your number is actually going to go up closer to 499 rather?
No, it's not going up. No.
Okay. So I guess my question then is, the other $70,000 worth of work that's in the On-Site Insight report, is that are you planning on basically pushing that off to a future year?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to get done, and we're still coming off of, we lost a good bit of last year.
Yeah.
So a fair amount of what's showing available is committed, but there's still a lot that's not. And when I say committed, I mean like under contract committed. Because it's not like we were picking up projects to add to in the middle of not being able to get any work done.
Yeah.
So we're going to close out the library. We're going to get all that site work done, and the library owns what they own, as we've said for a couple of years now. The town owns some of the finishes so that it can just be buttoned up and done. Re-landscape around town hall was part of the agreement we made, so we could get the front walk done and clean that all up. So that's all going to happen. And then we'll roll into starting some of this work, but it's a tall order to get some of this done.
All right, I guess I'll put the question now out for broader discussion with advisories. How does everybody feel, sort of from a philosophical and general fiscal management perspective of essentially doing what various people have been talking about doing for the past couple of years, which is to more accurately categorize operating as operating and put it into the town buildings operating budget to the tune of somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 each year above kind of what our current baseline is. To put it in perspective, going by approximately $13,000 is a penny in the tax rate. We're looking at somewhere from 3 to 7 or 8 cents on the tax rate additional each year by pulling these projects into the town buildings operating budget. So how does everybody feel about that?
I think we should do that. I mean, I think we should categorize things accurately. I think that makes sense. What would be helpful for me is to know, like, what's a general rule of thumb for maintenance costs, like per square foot or, per number of buildings, whatever. That would be helpful to give me some sort of objective data to compare this to. But I definitely think that we should fund maintenance as operating costs, and then do the on-site, inside capital projects that are truly capital as capital. That just makes sense.
I tend to agree. This is Mark. I tend to agree with that. It is what it is. Let's just account for it accurately, and we'll deal with whatever the ramifications are.
Hey guys, I'd chime in. Steve Leahy here. I agree. To properly categorize, to tell oneself the truth about the situation is better than to find a way to kind of change the truth. My question, kind of along the lines of what Brendan asked, is why the wide variance between between 50 and 100,000 on an annual basis, and maybe in the grand scheme of things, that's not that much of variance. And Sean, I noted you mentioned like sprinkler systems, but that's something that would, when we need to replace a sprinkler system, that goes into capital, I assume, because there's more than 10,000. And so the only question I have about this is why, Sean, in the next couple of years, why the expected wide variance, noting what you said about this year, that we're really playing catch up with the 265K or so.
Well, I know you asked Sean, but I do want to point out that this report covers 5 separate buildings. There's Town Hall, DPW, the police station, and fire station 1 and 2. So 50 to 100,000 across 5 buildings is more like 5 to 10,000 per building, right? Which really sounds like not very much.
Yeah, noted. Good point.
Tender note, Sean, I don't know if you had anything more to add to that.
No, that was, I didn't totally understand the question until you answered it, but just to put it in perspective, there's varying degrees of repairs for town hall, we typically do a little bit of sprinkler maintenance every year. And that, that stuff's expensive. It costs $1,000 to get those guys to walk in the door. This year we had kind of a catastrophic failure in the attic, so it was $30,000 to replace rotten pipe. That's not going to happen next year, but the leaky head, ruining a cabinet downstairs, that is. And unless it hits the insurance threshold, we got to fix it. We got to keep plugging those things away. The same thing happens with elevators. We cover the inspections every year in the operating budget, but the second they find something wrong, again, that stuff's expensive to fix. $5,000 goes away really fast. And it's happened at town hall a couple of times. It happened at the fire station last year. So, it's just hard to cover that stuff. It's hard to tell you every year where it's going to be, but it's going to be somewhere. It just keeps moving around. And it's the nature of keeping the buildings going. They're all pretty well maintained because they're not that old, but they're hitting an age where they need some maintenance. And it's not always going to be a $10,000 fix.
I guess another question is that the library is obviously not included in this because there's there's no building for on-site insight to assess yet. Is the library, the new building, going to get a similar type of report and plan?
So we actually delayed the rest of the buildings by a year plus, trying to get the library on the cycle. We didn't want to wait any longer. But what'll happen is they'll be able to take the start date, which actually is ironically going to coincide with the fiscal, God willing, if we can get in there. So in theory, most of the stuff has a 1-year warranty. A lot of the systems do, hopefully. So that most of it, they can just extrapolate all that data right in from the start. They'll probably want to come out for a walkthrough, but we will add that in. And of course, there's going to be maintenance going out that we either don't know about, didn't know ahead of time. It should start low the first year, I would hope.
Yeah.
Sean, I'm not sure if I understood something that you just said correctly. Did I hear you suggest that part of the reason there's the variation of, maybe another 50 to 100 a year for the maintenance is that every year, or, more or less every year, something happens that we can't foresee. And so it has to be fixed immediately. And so that, ends up inflating the amount that we need. And if I did understand you to be saying that, does that suggest that rather than just increase the town buildings budget, should we be increasing the reserve fund for that type of thing? Since it does seem to be, an emergency basis, if I was correctly understanding what you were saying. Did I understand that right, Sean?
A little bit of both. I think you understood it right, but you went a step ahead of me. It's right now, it's being covered by the previous town meeting warrant articles. So those things have been happening all along, right? So that's not going to change. I would expect there's going to be one of the elevators is going to have issues this year. We'll have a leaky sprinkler head at town hall. Those things are going to happen. Where that's going to get paid from currently is not the operating budget, right? We'd blow the operating budget if we fix all those things over the years. So it would come out of the annual town meeting warrant article. So I wouldn't suggest. The only way I'd say you should consider it reserve fund is if you said, Sean, we're not going to give you the town meeting warrant article, nor are we going to increase your budget. And I would say, that's fine. You better expect a reserve fund transfer. I think we've actually had those conversations in other things, but I don't think that's where we're headed. This is nothing new, if that answers your question. I'm not talking about anything. There's no expected or unexpected repairs that I see more than we saw last year. I just would say that if we pulled up every single warrant this year, the vast majority of those repairs were done booked against the town meeting article. Does that answer your question?
Well, it sort of does. I mean, it goes a long way to answering it, but I guess I'm still tossing around in my own head whether if that's the case, we're having this broad discussion about what's operating and what's capital. And I hear you saying that every year there are some emergencies that have to be paid for out of what has been approved as capital because, you need money to fix it, and that's where the money comes from. So I'm wondering, as we play this out, I'm wondering if we were to try to make sure that we weren't dealing with those emergencies as capital items, because they're really not. I mean, they might be if it's, the whole sprinkler system is gone and we have to replace it. But if that's not the case and it's just, damage that's caused by this or that, I'm wondering if rather than inflating the town buildings budget, it would make more sense to make sure we have enough. We could look at what the numbers have been roughly over the years of, this extra money that's needed, if you will, for the emergencies that come up. And maybe that should be in the reserve fund and not in the town buildings budget. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm only thinking that if we did have a year where nothing bad happened, then that's great and we wouldn't have to use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand you. I understand that point completely. And that in that instance, that would work. And it would be an agreement on both sides. It would be an agreement that you'd be saying, Sean, book it against the operating budget, and we're going to watch it all year, knowing full well that it may go in deficit. And we put something in the reserve fund to hold that, to cover it. And at the end of the year, no one's going to look at me funny when I show up for a reserve fund transfer to cover it. That
Maybe
could work.
You wouldn't even have to book it against the operating budget. Maybe, if something goes wrong and you got to fix it, you would come and you would say, I need a reserve fund transfer right now because we've had this emergency.
Yeah, well, that keep in mind, these are all small things that are what build up to that number. So I may not have that opportunity each, it's a $5,000 thing, it's a $6,000 thing, it's a $2,000 thing, and then all of a sudden we go, well, where was that coming from? We don't want to go for 7 reserve fund transfers across the year.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
And this is why you had asked for that revolving fund initially. That's to make this full circle, right?
Yeah, well, that was actually just to keep. That was separate than this.
Okay.
That was to keep from having to close out the town building articles, because the projects span across multiple years, but this is a different conversation, and I think myself and Stephen Sy probably had these conversations more than anyone else here. Maybe Jeff Waldron with Keisha and the others on capital budget, because it was, when you look at it in the detail, you see it a lot better than we can see it here. When you talk about painting garage doors and other things that just it doesn't make sense to be capitalizing them. And if anyone from the municipal finance world were looking at it, they go, you capitalize that? And I'm not even sure some of these things are bondable. Because you're throwing these against what Heidi turns around and tries to bond with things that are 20-year life expectancy, and we're talking about paint on a garage door that's going to fall off the building in 5 years.
Understood.
Well, so far it sounds like most of the input from advisory has been generally in support of this idea of moving operating into operating. I think that's the goal. Every time I think about what that actually means for the tax rate, I kind of backpedal a little bit, but it is. I mean, I think it's what we've been talking about, and I think it's what we need to basically decide to do. And I think certainly part of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion now is so that we weren't having this discussion, in February of 2022, and sniping at each other again. So I think that if we can come to an agreement that this is going to be the strategy moving forward for town buildings, then hopefully we can hammer out a plan that isn't a surprise to anybody next year. And I wanted to make sure that this plan is okay with Sean, and it's okay with all of the members of advisory.
And so, Steve, to recap, and I'm sorry, I don't have the spreadsheets open in front of me, but the DPW, town buildings operating budget has seen an increase of, what was the number, 265K this year?
No. This year, that's essentially getting rolled up into the capital request. We're not going to make that change this year, I think. Okay. I mean, that was another part of the reason for this meeting, is to make sure that we were all in agreement that we weren't going to start this year. But yeah, that 265, that's in year one of the on-site insight report. And that's getting bundled up into the $430,000 capital request for town buildings.
Thank you. And then going forward, we can expect to see, and you had quoted the numbers previously. Again, I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me, but anywhere from effectively 45 to 100K per year in DPW operating expenses above and beyond the core baseline that we have currently.
Right.
Sorry, for town buildings. Thank you.
Right.
And the benefit financially from that additional money in the operating budget, well, certainly for the town, the buildings get the care that has been recommended, and we would not be seeing that same 50 to 100K per year somehow jammed into capital, which wouldn't be great anyway. That's really what we're saying, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody from advisory have anything else they want to add? Or Sean, is there anything else you wanted to say about this topic? Do you feel good about this, where we're at right now?
Do I feel good about the tax rate? No. Do I feel good about properly accounting for the spend that the town needs on the building? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's going to be rough, right? Because, I mean, our tax rate, it's gone up 20 to 40 cents each of the past, 3 years now. And this isn't going to help the guests get the tax rate down next year. I mean, we're going to blast past 20 next year. But we're making that decision right now that we're not going to help ourselves out we're going to make this change next year, right?
Well, I think there are a lot of moving parts, right? I mean, I totally agree with Brendan that it would be helpful to have some, data that gives us a guideline as to how much it should cost to run these buildings, because we want to make sure that, we're in line with other towns, what other towns pay for this kind of thing. So, I think that's one thing, and that might help inform what we do. And then, Sean, if you know that, you've got a bunch of things that you could either kind of, baby along for a couple years, and then it would be an operating, but maybe it would be easier, especially or better in an interest rate low environment to just, make it a capital project and do it, then, that could inform what you would ask for. So, I mean, I think we have to look at it from a bunch of different perspectives. I think it would be, I don't think it's a good idea to just say, okay, well, we definitely have, $50,000 to $100,000 more of operating expense, because I'm not sure we really know that. I think, some of it could be emergency spend that should really be coming out of the reserve fund. Some of it could be that it would be legitimately be better handled as a capital expense, because it can be, and because it would be less expensive to do it that way. So, I think it's just a question of sitting down and thinking it through and figuring out what's the best way to get the job done for the least, dollars.
Yeah, and I think, certainly year after year, that's part of the job of the DPW director and the capital budget committee, right? Is to go through the list of projects that are recommended and determine, are the things that Onsite Insight recommends, are they actually necessary, right? Because they don't know what's going to happen 3 years from now, right? There might be a piece of equipment that the useful life of it is listed as something that should be replaced 3 years from now, but Sean may look at it and be like, no, it's totally fine, So I think so. That's part of what the job of everybody year after year. But I think that mentally, to just have ourselves prepared for something in the 45 to 100K range, and obviously it's like once you go up by that 45,000, that becomes your new baseline, right? So you're not going up an additional 45K every single year. You've just reset your baseline is all. So
Stephen,
I think, yep, go ahead.
It's David. I just wanted to point out that there's also a capacity of, so I don't think this number is going to be running away. The repairs, the needed repairs may run away, but there's only so much we can do in each year when it's Sean, me, and Diane, and Sean's assistant, Addie May. So it's not like we have an unlimited amount of time to put on capital projects. So I think it's a natural, it's kind of like a natural cap on how much we can be spending on the buildings, because it's not an open ceiling that is just going to keep going up, because we can't, there's only so much we can do or get done in a year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the data, if you look at the data in the past, it's before we had Sean as the town buildings manager, it was basically Diane and I using that budget and it like duct tape. So the things that we saw or see fall apart in front of us is what got the attention. So now we're trying to switch that around and be more proactive. So it's going to cost more, but I don't think it's going to keep climbing and climbing. I just don't know where that sweet spot is, that it just levels off or starts falling because everything is properly maintained, and that's all.
All right. Well, if nobody has anything more for Sean, then I think that's it. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So moving on, our next item is the select board and legal budgets, but David, has the select board actually looked at their own budget yet?
Yeah. The legal budget, just, it depends on, I don't think you have to spend much time on it. Philosophically, it's whether you want to budget what you expect for the true costs, or if you just cover the contracted retainer of town council and maybe a little bit more. So in the last couple of years, there's been an effort to put more money into the legal budget beyond what the retainer is, to try to reflect a more accurate legal budget. But if you look at the legal budget right now, it's 120,000 year to date. So you're 50% over what where we thought we would be if we really thought that 80,000 was a true number. But we know it's going to be more. We know it's going to be, I can't remember the last time that there was anything below 100,000 for the legal, but the actual year-end legal. So right now, there's not really any talk of increasing that 80,000 to reflect what we would think is a more accurate number. It's kind of like we're just using the 80,000 as a standard and expecting that if we can't make the ends meet at the end of the year, then we need to go for a reserve fund transfer or intergovernmental transfer. And then the worst case scenario is if something does come up and there's a ton of legal costs that were unexpected, that gets taken care of the commitment in the next year, because the two things that you can roll into the commitment for next year to pay are legal fees and snow and ice. So you can exceed the budget each year. And that's kind of what some municipalities believe as well. If we can go over anyway, so why are we going to upfront raise it in the tax rate if we really don't know exactly what that number is going to be?
Sure.
Did that just confuse the issue?
No, I mean, that makes sense. I feel like the legal and snow and ice issues those are also things that I think that we'll need to look at and try to tackle in coming years. I have a suspicion, when S&P sort of like looks at our financials and then they see us using free cash to cover expenses, that thereby lowering the tax rate. I suspect, I might be wrong, but I suspect that the way we handle snow and ice and legal probably plays into that. Because instead of budgeting appropriately for what we know the expense is going to be and then levying the residents on that, we are instead knowingly under budgeting those items and then later on paying them with supplementals out of free cash.
Yeah.
So I suspect that that's a thing that we need to look at probably.
Yeah. But still if you had to look at the bright side, is I don't think we've ever had to actually levy it in a commitment from the next year to pay off the legal fees. I don't know about snow and ice, but I don't think we've been in any situation where we've had to add that onto the tax rate for the following year to pay the previous year's legal fees. Some towns it's routine.
Yeah, but I might be misunderstanding the S&P report, but I suspect that that's precisely the problem, right? That's part of the cost of running the town, is paying for snow and ice and legal, and the residents should be taxed for clearing the snow off of all of the roads. And instead of being taxed for clearing all the snow, some amount of that is being paid from free cash. And I think that that's where basically their conclusion is you've used free cash to lower your tax rate, and that's not a good practice.
It may not. I don't see why they would say it's not a good practice, because there are I haven't worked in any towns who aren't putting free cash against their budgets to reduce the tax rate. I think any of I guess I'd have to check, because it's been a few years since I've looked at like Weston or Wellesley, but it would be good to know of what their free cash, what they spend it on. Everybody has tried to get, I think our number is usually like 1.2 million or something that we try to bank on. anything between 800,000 and like 1.5 million, we're pretty happy with. I don't think it's been a while. I mean, I think it's been a while since we've had over 2 million in free cash, but I think depending on who does the analysis, you can argue that what we're doing it makes sense for us.
Yeah, but we have to convince S&P of that.
Yeah, I'm okay doing that. I don't have a problem with that because, I mean, usually with them, if you show them what the plan is and if the alternative would have had more negative effects on the financial health of the town, it's hard for them to stick to their guns on that. And then if they didn't give us a rating that we felt was fair, then we would appeal it. We've always had good luck with them anyway, arguing some of the things that might be unique in one town. But I don't think that's that unique in Massachusetts for a town. But I would like to look more at that.
All right. So the most recent budget that I've got for select board has a total increase over FY21 of 12.38%. Salaries seem to be in line with our guidance, which is 1.9%. The expenses are slightly over double, and I think almost all of that comes from the IT line. So what's the status of the IT situation and the attempts to make that its own department?
We can ask Deb where it's at. I had requested that the accounts be set up and zero budgeted for next year, and then early next year start populating the budgets into it as through budget adjustments from the other departments. I just think it could be messy trying to budget for it and reducing the other departments right now, but that was my preference. And Deb Seifring, I think, is on here.
Yeah,
I don't know if she said want to explain why. I mean, if it's set up as a department or if it's some sort of cost center thing that's just pulling from certain lines to.
Yeah, I can set it. I can go ahead and set up it as a separate department so that all IT expenses will go right to that. And then we can have a line item for, and actually within the department, break it down by like subcategories for different departments. So you can see how much money is spent on maintenance in the town clerk's office and how much is spent in, so you'd be able to see a lot more detail of what the IT is. So yeah, I kind of did a brief overview of what it would look like to make a new department, but it's really, you can't really do it during the course of the year. So I'm kind of ready to roll with that once we hit July 1st.
Okay, so we are on the same page with that then.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, that sounds good. So then in this current budget, the IT line is kind of like weird because it says FY18 actual was $14, 19 actual was $185, 20 actual was $52,000, and then the FY21 budget was $0. And then FY22's budget is $35,000. There's just what's happening there.
Well, I think what happened in last year's budget, there was talk of making it a new department. Well, it used to be in the town buildings department, and then it got switched to the selectmen's budget, and then there was a disconnect, and it didn't get budgeted at all.
Okay.
So for FY21, there is no budget for IT. So that's why you see it going from 0 to 35,000.
Right. And it was that line in town buildings, and some years we would it would be tapped out, so it really wasn't going to technology. So we wanted to that's how it ended up moving to the selectman's office until we could have an actual department. But we have wanted to move the expenses out of other departments for a while, and I just want to go in and do a whole list of journal entries of budget adjustments for just pulling them out of the other departments. But you're going to end up next year, when you start looking at the budget, it can just be a little clunky looking back to see all the budget adjustments and what the reasons were. But it was just trying to do it something that's methodical, I guess. Because it has been piecemeal, and things have been charged to where there's money,
Yeah. So the 35,000 that's in the FY22 budget, then that is new money because last year's 0 was an oversight, or is that 35,000 getting pulled from various other budgets? So like, do we see a proportionate decrease in any other department budgets for IT related things that are all being aggregated into that 35,000?
I mean, if town buildings was reduced by that technology amount and it wasn't added back somewhere, then yeah, that's a problem. This would become all new. But I don't remember if that's what happened. Deb, do you?
I think I think it's new. Like I said, I don't think in for FY21 there was no budget in town buildings and there was no budget in selectmen. So this is kind of new.
Yeah, and I remember that we didn't do that intentionally, I don't think.
No, I don't believe so.
I'm looking at town buildings right now, and for FY21, the IT line is also 0. So that was just a complete. Okay.
Well,
what's money in other departments? I mean, remember there was I know the building inspector had a fairly significant ask both last year and another one this year, and the fire department and the police department have their own separate budgets. So I mean, I have the same question Steve has. What is this 35,000? Because if this is an amalgamation of the fire, of the police, or if it's supposed to be, of what the building inspector is looking for, then those amounts should be reduced from those budgets and put into this one. But if this is additive to all of that, then I guess I would question, what is that supposed to be for?
I think what we were supposed to be budgeting was basically the amount that we had in the town buildings line before that was being used for technology. But
because if I look back at those numbers, it's 35,000, 34,000, 23,000, 31,000.
Yeah, I think that's all it's based on.
That's what, sorry?
I'm sorry. I think that's what the number is based on that we use for the 35.
Yeah, so it makes sense that basically it isn't theoretically, Jane, it's not actually new money because it's been in there since FY18. It's just that last year it was an oversight that it was 0 in both town buildings and the select board budget. But it does go, one of the things I've been trying to figure out, and I've been failing somewhat at, is how, when you look at our projected tax rate, we go from 1963 to 2002. It's a 40-cent jump, and I'm like looking at overall. I mean, overall, the town's omnibus is 0.88% over guidance. I'm not sure how we went to a 40-cent jump in the tax rate. while really holding the line pretty well on budgets. So I think it's little stuff like this that adds up, you know. I mean, that's 3 cents right there that just poof, just reappeared because it should have been there last year and wasn't.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I think other than that, the select board's budget looks pretty flat. One thing I wanted to ask about was the sustainability coordinator. Obviously, that's a new position, and but I know that one of the ways that, you know, one of the advantages of it was that it was supposed to basically pay for itself by bringing in lots of grant money and this and that. So have we been keeping track of any grant monies or other savings that have been brought to the town by the sustainability coordinator?
Yeah. I thought you had a sustainability item where she was actually in and discussed sustainability. That didn't happen.
No.
Okay.
No, because I mean, essentially, we're just going off of departments that have budgets, and I don't believe the sustainability department exists as a budget. There's just the line for a sustainability coordinator now.
Yeah, I thought early on that it was listed somewhere to have her in. Or at least that's what I expected. I kind of thought that she had already been in and talked to everybody, because she should come in so that you can ask questions, but probably now time is too tight. But yeah, she and Gino Carlucci are tracking that stuff.
We just received notice today that they're sending about I believe it's $19,000 we just deposited today for sustainability after like what we submitted. So we are getting some money into the grant. So you don't see it in the operating budget.
That's the first year that we split the cost with Holliston was I think a $50,000 earmark, and it split 25 each way between Sherborn and Holliston. And then for the second year, I put in for a $38,000 legislative earmark for the whole salary. So that was approved, and the 19th, basically we just got half of it. So at year end, we will send the rest of the payroll amounts to get the remainder for the full 38,000.
That's applied to the current fiscal year, or is that for fiscal year 22?
Current fiscal year.
Okay.
So I asked for it again for next year, and the answer I got was, what do you think seed money is? Because that was really the intent, was that it was seed money to get sustainability started, and then it should be paying for itself, and the town should be paying, covering the salary.
Right.
But it's covered right now, but that's an earmark. It's not necessarily the grant that people had in mind of sustainability going out and get. And we are helping her with there's a sustainability website that's been getting rolling. I think it'll be rolled out by the end of the month. We took care of all those costs out of the selectman's office. But that's an outreach tool for her, and the energy committee has been working with her, and it's just hard to pick right now. I can't point to any grants that we wouldn't have gotten without the sustainability coordinator, other than paying the $38,000 towards sustainability. I just don't look at that as a grant. But it would really, she and Gino can explain what, actually Gino might be on here if you wanted to comment on it. They've
Yeah, I
definitely.
mean, Gino is on here, but I didn't want to put him on the spot with a topic
I
that you
know.
weren't prepared to talk about.
They definitely have been busy and applied. I just can't speak to what the actual returns were.
Well, we have a grant looking at the feasibility of geothermal at Pine Hill School. We have another smaller grant to do some outreach, work with the school system. Sorry for my image here. I'm usually not on an iPad. Having a little trouble holding it, but Green Communities is coming up, and that's in a couple of weeks. We'll have an application in for that, and that's I think one where we have a very good shot at, and looking forward to that one. That would be what we're thinking of. What our projects lined up right now would be mostly weatherization projects for 4 town buildings, and plus converting the street lights to LEDs.
Mm-hmm.
And Gino, do you have a rough idea of the total, of all the grants that have come in, if you want, even if you want to include the Green Communities?
Well, the ones that we actually got are just under 20,000, but the Green Communities will be over 100. The other one we have pending, which is kind of related to the article that we have coming up later on, is to the article we have coming up is for the easement to go from Whitney Street to the Upper Charles Rail Trail. We have a grant pending. It's already been submitted to complete the actual rail trail portion itself on the old rail bed from the end of our new trail connection, what we call the trail connection, to the Holliston town line. That one was about 31,000.
What are you gonna?
If we get that, I mean, there's no guarantee.
What are you gonna do with that? What are you gonna do on the rail trail?
We're going to upgrade the surface so that it matches what Holliston has. In other words, grade it, put down some stone dust, essentially, and some drainage issues.
But is that a sustainability project?
Well, it might be.
It's environmental.
Yeah. It's not energy related, that's for sure, but it does promote nature and walking, walking, hiking, that type of thing.
Okay, but
it doesn't reduce.
That's not really the
carbon.
I don't think that's what we had in mind though when we were originally thinking about sustainability. I mean, I agree with Steve. I'd like to better understand, what this position has added. I mean, Gino, you've been applying for these grants all along, and we've been getting them. So I'm just trying to understand what the additional value has been from the, additional position for the 38,000 that we're paying in an additional position. I don't know.
Think we can,
yeah, and also, I honestly, it's not on the agenda to actually discuss the sustainability coordinator, and I don't really want to put Gino on the spot on that right now. But I'd say that so long as there is an accounting of the activities of both Gino, your extra hours, and then also the sustainability coordinator, we may just set up in a future meeting to have this discussion. I think it's a good thing to know, obviously, for years coming forward, especially as we look at the budget for the sustainability coordinator position. We just want to make sure that it is accomplishing what it was set out to do, and part of the way it was sold to the town was that it was going to bring in so much more money, multiple times over the salary. And I was a little dubious about the numbers that were being bandied about. But I would like to see what the actual numbers are. But again, I think that is. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say that this is really the first full year that we'll be able to look back and see. I know there are other small, other grants that we've worked on with, like the electric car cells that the charging stations, and we would put those in after the library gets completed. So the charging stations, and then there was kind of a program about lawn mowing with electric lawn mowers, where we would be able to potentially reduce the mowing contract and save money there, if this grant worked out, which is kind of funny. It's a mower that takes care of itself. It parks itself in its own little house and charges, and then goes out on a route and mows the lawn when it needs it, and then goes back in the house and charges again. I just have visions that I'm running out in Washington Street to pull the lawnmower out of the street because it's driving itself out off the lawn. But, she said they work, so we'll see if we end up with that kind of pilot project. But I think I think it's been well explained to her what the original intent was, that, after this, the position really has to justify itself, on paper.
Yeah. Now we just want to make sure that there's an accountability there.
Is the position reporting to you, David?
Excuse me?
Is the position reporting to you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll pencil that in for a discussion in a future meeting. I don't think it has any direct relevance to this year's town meeting, because I don't think that we're suggesting that that anything change about that position in FY22. Does anybody from advisory have any other comments or questions for David Williams?
Yes, David, may I ask, the 1.9 trillion, the last boondoggle from the government, will any of that trickle down to 2022's budget in terms of revenue or offsetting costs, like the CARES Act or whatever?
Peter, I'm not there.
Because if we did get about 30 million, I think it would make us all set.
Peter, there was something in the Globe today that said we were going to get like something close to 1.3 million, or at least that's what had been allocated for us.
Okay.
As like a CARES Act
yeah.
thing.
From this latest stimulus that was passed. But I wasn't clear on how that money could be used. I mean, does that have to be used for COVID expenses, or is that just relief for cities and towns? I'm not totally clear on that.
That seems like a lot more than just direct COVID expenses, but I would have to look at it.
Sean Colleen has his hand up. Sean, do you have something to say about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure whoever was taking the notes would make sure we get the boondoggle in the notes. That's the first time I've ever heard that on one of these meetings. That was great.
Well, luckily, Peter's taking the notes, and Peter's the one who called it a boondoggle. So,
and maybe you caught my humor in that. That was awesome.
I just, Jane, I need to see the paperwork, because I haven't been following the finances like that. So, but I usually don't. If it says that it's a wire transfer coming to us in X amount, then I get excited. But if it's something that's being set aside and held by somebody else, I just get nervous. So I don't know what strings are on this money right now, to be honest.
But if we could figure that out before, because that's material to what we're doing here. Like if we knew we had that money to put toward our budget, That would be.
Jeff, do you have?
Can I comment, Steve?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
So two things. One, last year we got 392,000 in last year's COVID relief, the CARES Act funding, which was COVID expense. We're told we're going to get 450,000 this year for CARES Act. It may have a different name, but for COVID expenses. But then I texted this week David Linsky, and he confirmed the number that was in the Globe that someone else mentioned, which is $1,268,418, which is separate from COVID expenses. That's sort of municipal funding, for towns that have lost revenue. He called it it's MMA estimate. And so for Sherborn, it was just under 1.3 million. Now I don't know what the timing of that is, but it's included in the Biden 9 trillion dollars.
Jeff, is that an amount that is ours, that's like completely funded and it's allocated to us?
I don't know the answer to that, David, but I think that's the intent.
Okay. All right.
Like I said, it was Linsky that sent it to me, but it was actually someone mentioned it. I can't remember if it was Natalie, but it was in the Globe where you could put in your town, and that matches. But this was a text message that Linsky sent me, whatever day it was. I think it was Monday.
It just seems like such a big number that I
know.
I mean, do we have to demonstrate that we actually have a lost revenue in a, that's in the same ballpark in order to actually get it?
It didn't sound like that. I'm not sure how they divvied it up. I mean, they made extra allocation for towns or cities like Brockton and disadvantaged communities, but that was still our share. So
yeah, because if I was the state, I don't know that I would just hand $1.3 million to Sherborn and just be like, here you go.
Well, they're getting it from they're getting it from the federal government, so they have some allocation scheme. But I understand what you're saying, but that's just. I had two reporting sources there. The Boston Globe. Yeah. If you type in Sherborn, that's the same number that Linsky sent me.
Yeah. Right. So I'll look into, or Deb and I'll look into.
Thank you.
The plan on how that gets secured, and if it's if you can go to the bank on it, then it could affect the budget.
That does just about cover our jump in the omnibus, so that would be nice.
All right, well, let's try to nail that down, Jeff and Deb.
All right, any other comments or questions for David Williams? I've seen some hands go up and go back down, so I'm going to assume that comments were already made or questions answered.
I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor it, but I just want to make sure so the 35,000 for the IT is in addition to what the police and the fire and the building inspector have asked for in their budgets. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah, because that still isn't actually covering the IT for those departments, right? I think that's the pre-existing IT. Essentially, that should have been there last year anyways, and it's an oversight that it wasn't there last year.
Right. So we ate it somewhere.
Yeah. So even though it looks like an increase, it actually shouldn't be. All right, so if there's nothing else for David, I think we're ready to move on to the police department. And so we have Dave Bento here. Let me pull up the latest police department thing here. All right, so I don't know, Dave, if you want to just kind of go over these scenario 1, 2, 3 things, or I know Sharon just sent this out today. but I presume you understand what's going on here, or if not, maybe Sharon or Deb can go over it. But I'll give you the floor for right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I did speak with Sharon and Deb and David over the last couple of days. Tried to work up some different scenarios that I know you folks were looking for. So basically, what one scenario shows is the reduction of those 3 additional officers, so back down to the total number of 20, but then to kind of adjust for the overtime and training that I'm thinking is coming along. One of them includes a higher number of hours and more in-service training. I tried to look into the crystal ball and see what police reform is going to bring us for additional training. They're telling us there's going to be more mandated training, but we really haven't been given anything yet. The 2 commissions that are going to be formed aren't even going to start until July 1, and then another one in September. So it's coming. We just don't know how much. So, the one scenario with the higher total of overtime hours and in-service hours reflects that. And then just to, try and give another option, I included another option with without a change to the in-service and with an overtime hours of 4,500, which I looked at where we're at now. And right now for this year, we're at 4,300 and it's only March. So I'm hoping that as we get into being fully staffed, next year at this time will be a lot less. But we're still looking at, I think with the 20 officer scenario and without the additional 3, we're looking at having to pay overtime when officers go to in-service training. We're looking at having to pay some overtime when officers are, using accrued time or when they're, leaving and we're trying to fill vacancies. So that's how I came up with those 3 different scenarios. And if Sharon or Deb or David, if I missed anything and you want to jump in, go right ahead. And if not, if the board has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
How many hours of overtime are scheduled for the current fiscal year?
Well,
I know we're already, past what was budgeted, but I just want to know what.
Currently, we're at $178,000. Well, we've spent 178,716, and we budgeted for 178. So we're already over that, and that was only as of a couple of weeks ago. So I looked at it. We've got 7 payrolls left to make, and historically, May and June are always really tough on us because the end of the fiscal year is coming. So officers a lot of times will hold off on using time off, and then they hurry up and burn through it in May and June so they don't lose it. And we saw this last year with COVID, and people are starting to get back into taking vacations a little bit. I mean, most of the department's been fully vaccinated for a while, so I think that's made people more comfortable to take time off, travel, et cetera. And also, they're trying to take time off when their kids are on vacation, et cetera. So, I think May and June will be high as it has been in the past. So, last year we spent $390,000 in overtime. I don't see us, getting anywhere near that this year, but I think we could easily, spend another 50 or 60,000 this year. And it's also relative to the, the collective bargaining agreement was settled last year, which, brought up some increases in pay. There was a stipend introduced for officers that were on for 5 years or more, trying to get officers to stay and not leave. So, that brought some of the base pays up, which brought some of the overtime rates up. There were also some stipends introduced that also had a reflection on the FLSA overtime rates. So that's another reason why the overtime crept up. It's not totally because of the hours, it's also because of the dollar rate. So that's sort of what I'm anticipating. It's going to continue to go that route.
So I guess I've got a few questions about these assumptions. Because my understanding, I know that we are, obviously going to go well over our budgeted overtime for the current fiscal year. But my understanding when we spoke the first time around was that a lot of the reason for that is because you haven't had the opportunity to even be fully staffed. until, I mean, I think it was, we spoke in February, I think it was, and you had only just recently filled 2 positions who I believe, did both of them have to go to the academy?
Well,
So
those, they came on actually the first week of December. They actually started the same day that one of the officers left to go to another department. So they came in academy trained, but they had to go through field training. So
I see.
we didn't pay for their academy, but we paid for, all of the hiring process, the medical, the psychological, the background, et cetera. We paid for all the uniform and equipment startup, that we're obligated to. And then they went on field training, which is, about 10, 12 weeks. So they are on their own now, yes. But even though before they were hired, we were paying them, but they were still kind of in that training mode. So right now we're really only short those 2 that we spoke of, those 2 civilians.
Yeah, right. And so I guess to me that's the sort of critical point here, right? Is that you budgeted an amount for overtime for this year, which was, significantly less than FY20, and a lot of that was predicated on the 4 additional staff that we had, approved last year, which was 2 sworn officers and 2 civilian dispatchers. So meanwhile, I know that the 2 dispatchers have not been hired, and then furthermore, it sounds like basically it's not like you had 6 months of having 2 additional sworn officers that were, actively in the rotation. And so to me, I guess my goal would be that the department needs to get up to those 4 that we had approved for FY21, right? So the 2 sworn officers and the 2 civilian dispatchers. And we need to get that in place, and those bodies basically in the rotation for a year to see what effect that has. I mean, to me, whatever the underlying thinking was behind the budget this year for overtime, which I believe it came out to something like 3,700 hours of overtime. To me, my assumption would be in the FY22 budget, we should, keep the same number of staff in the department, and budget for the same number of hours of overtime that you had budgeted in FY21, at whatever the new rate would be for FY22. And I understand that we know full well that based on the current situation that we're going to blow right past that overtime number. But in terms of budgeting, my sort of position would be we should budget for having a fully staffed department. The fact that we know that it isn't currently fully staffed is not really a valid reason to say, so we should therefore budget way more in overtime. It's like, well, we should budget for having the appropriate number of people and then budget for the appropriate amount of overtime that would call for. And then subsequently, if we go past that in overtime, then we'll talk about doing a supplemental appropriation next year. But right now, I don't, I think that I believe that it's going to be up to, you and or the new permanent police chief to fill those positions. And it may be up to the select board in impact bargaining with the union to ensure that these the dispatchers are actually approved and hired, because that's what we had discussed last year, and that's what was going to allow us to reduce the overtime this year, and that hasn't been allowed to happen.
Right.
So
and
from my perspective, yep, go ahead.
I look forward to that, Stephen. And the only other thing I would mention is, as far as the staffing goes, when I looked ahead at where we were going, my intention was to keep the detective in the detective role, and even look at, right now we have it's kind of juggled around. I'm in an interim role as the chief, which has left the lieutenant role open. I'm imagining down the road here that the lieutenant's not going to be out on patrol, like I was. I think having a department where you've got a chief and you've got no administrative aid, and then you've got a lieutenant. I see the lieutenant being more of an administrative role moving forward, and that's sort of where I was going with that. And then also, the chief, so I didn't count them into the mix of being on the rotation on the schedule. So that's where I was looking. And then, again, it is tough to look into the crystal ball and see where is the long-term sick going to be, or where is the person that's going to be leaving going to be. But just sort of historically, that's what's been happening. So I know in the past we've picked an overtime number, we've gone way over it, and then we go back and we ask for more in the spring. And if that's the way we're going to go, then that's fine. I was just trying to nail it down as close as I could to what I've seen happening over the past few years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I understand that, you're looking at the situation and trying to predict what's actually going to happen next year and then budget appropriately for that.
Yeah.
I guess, the way I see it is that the staffing is in, it's, as you noted, it's currently in a significant state of flux, right? So beyond getting those two sworn officers and then the two dispatchers, obviously as you said, the lieutenant role is open right now. So that's going to be at some point another officer added to the staff, right?
Exactly.
So,
and also it's not just the it's not just the filling in the holes on the schedule. As I'm also looking at it as the level of service that we're providing, and we have been pretty busy, and there are a fair amount of things that tie an officer up or bring an officer to have to leave town, and that's been going on quite a bit. And we've had to fill overtime because officers are doing investigations, or they're going to court, things like that. So the activity level has picked up. So I'm trying to also calculate it into that we're providing the service that people want and they deserve. So
yeah,
another part of another piece of the puzzle here.
No, I mean, that's fully understandable. I mean, I think that's a lot of the reason why I was a proponent of getting the Novak study done, to figure out what is needed and to get the staffing appropriate. But to me, one of the key parts of the strategy is to look at the dispatch position, right? Which I think they determined you require 4 FTE dispatchers to fill that role. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, right? And
that still doesn't cover it all, but it covers quite a bit. You're right.
Yeah. And now I know that we've gone from our one civilian dispatcher recently left the department, right? So now we've got 0. So now those 4 FTEs are being filled by sworn officers, right? And to me, I'm like, well, that's a premium staff member there, a sworn officer, now filling what I would consider a non-premium position, right? At least in terms of the pay, right? You don't need a sworn officer to be filling a dispatch. So, so to get,
I agree with you 100% on that, and I appreciate that you did support this study and the increases. And believe me, nobody wants to see full staffing, more than I do. I'd love to see it for a year, and I know exactly where you're coming from. You want to see what was budgeted, be implemented, and then have a year to look back and say, okay, this is what it did for us, so this is what it didn't do for us. And we just have not had those opportunities, unfortunately. And I wish I had more control over where guys are deciding to leave or positions they're giving up. And it's also kind of a trend in the job right now. Nationally, this is kind of a tough job right now, and people are just bailing. There's never been so many openings. So sadly, we're not getting a lot of response on our dispatch posting. I was hoping we'd have, more applicants to choose from. So it's going to be a challenge moving forward. We'll see what happens.
Chief, I have a question about the dispatch position, because my understanding is that there's a limitation in the existing agreement on the number of dispatch positions that we can have. And so, and that's it seems to be a little bit of a disconnect with what we had approved last year, which was 2 dispatchers. And yet it appears that only 1 is permitted under the current, contract. So trying to understand how that plays into this as well.
That's a big part of it.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't hear that.
That's a big part of this, and that's what's being worked on right now. So we're hoping to take care of that issue.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's pretty crucial that currently, what advisory has effectively approved, or what we would like to see is 3 full-time civilian dispatchers on staff, and presumably that releases 3 full-time sworn officers to enter into patrol shifts, right? Which I would assume I think the whole strategy is that is going to go a long way towards relieving some of the overtime issues, right? And I understand that the current staffing is not that, and so therefore the overtime issues are going to continue. But I guess that's my perspective is that it doesn't feel fiscally responsible to therefore budget a large amount of overtime because we know that our current staffing is not what we have approved. My thinking would be, well, no, we've got to keep on rolling with what we've approved and just try to execute on that plan, and then see how that goes. Because should things fall in the way that we like, and we do hire 3 civilian dispatchers, and then we do get a permanent chief position, and then therefore hire a lieutenant, and now all of a sudden the staffing situation is much better than it is right now, and then we're not going to need 6,539 hours of overtime, right?
Right.
So I would prefer not to budget for that right now, because we don't know that that's going to be the situation for the entire fiscal year. In fact, I would hope that that's not going to be the situation for the entire fiscal year. So my recommendation would be actually a sort of scenario 4 where you reduce remove the 3 FTEs that are in the original request, and also actually bring the overtime back down to whatever the request was for the current fiscal year, FY21, in terms of the number of hours of overtime that were budgeted, and then just kind of calculate that at whatever the current CBA's hourly rate is for the overtime. So that's what I would recommend. And then furthermore, looking, if we were to reduce those 3 FTEs, I think there's a couple of other items in the operating budget that may be related to having those 3 FTEs. And I'm just wondering whether, it's things like uniforms and new hire training. And I'm wondering also even the body cam stipend, it went from 15,000 to 17,000. Is that because of the assumption that there would be 2 additional officers that would be getting that stipend?
Right. It's 1,000 per year per officer. So right. If you cut 2 sworn, you'd cut that back to 15.
So I'd cut that to 15. And then I believe there was the police budget was in a couple of different spreadsheets here. So then in the operating budget, there was an item, PD clothing / uniforms. It went up from 14,400 last year to 21,300. Is that based on having the 3 additional staff?
It is somewhat, but it's also the CBA went from 900 to 1,200 per officer.
Okay.
So it would be, you'd cut it down by
2,400.
2 officers by, so 2,400 total, but the rest would have to stay in for the existing officers that are there.
Yeah. So that would be my recommendation. I haven't gone through to make those calculations to see what the effect would be, but I would say let's bring the staff and take those 3 FTEs out, and then also reduce the body cam stipend to 15, and then bring the clothing and uniforms down to whatever that number would be, and then to bring your overtime calculation down to basically being in line with the equivalent of level funded plus whatever the 2% COLA on the overtime would come out to be. and, sort of knowing full well that at the end of the year, your budget's probably going to go over that if all of the staffing changes don't get implemented. But to me, I'm like, I don't know that it's wise for us as advisory to say we're just going to assume that the staffing changes that we approved aren't going to get implemented, and therefore overtime is going to get blown out of the water. I don't like that. I don't like making that decision. You know what I mean? If it means that we have to do a supplemental appropriation, then that's what we do. It's sort of like saying, we're budgeting snow and ice at some historically low level that we know that it's not going to be, but it's.
I guess you want to look at the training kind of as the same, same thought process. We're doing a budget now for a July 1 start of a year when we know there's going to be changes coming July 1. So if the state mandates a lot more training, then that training line is going to go up, and next year it'll be a transfer to cover training.
The training line, that was the other question I had would be the additional training. Do you have a sense for when that training would actually occur in the calendar year, and when the money would be needed to pay for it?
My guess is it's going to be pretty close to the beginning of the fiscal year, because they're talking, one of the pieces of it was July and the other piece was September. So it should be right along in there. I did also increase a little bit of that training as well, because initially my goal was to try and send more officers to training while on shift. And I think we're going to have less opportunity to do that with the 20 FTEs versus the 23. So that's why I think that probably will creep up a little bit.
Yeah.
And again, it's the mandated officer in services, the bare minimum, which, we don't really want to be at the bare minimum, is 40 hours per officer per year. So that's what the police reform has talked about doing the increases for, and the whole, certification of officers when they form that, commission. They're going to come out with some other new guidelines and rules on police training. And, like most things that come down, from the state, they're going to be mandates, but they won't be funded. So we'll have to pick up some of that. But, I don't think they're going to double it. I think you could be talking about an additional, 8 or 12 or 16 hours per officer would probably be a fair guess. So it's not a huge amount of money, in the whole scheme of things.
Okay. I would say for the additional mandated training, I think that you should probably budget what you think is appropriate, since that's a number that we know is going to happen for the number of officers that we have, right? And it's going to be a year after year. It's going to be an ongoing expense, right?
Yeah, I don't see it going down.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I can work on those with Sharon and Deb and shoot you back some more spreadsheets.
Okay. Does anybody from advisory have any comments or questions for Chief Bento? All right. Then I think that's it for the police.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. All right. Next, we have Wendy Alassi. Again, sort of continuation of the discussion of the revaluation situation with utilities. I don't remember specifically the exact topic that we were talking about. I just know that we were getting too deep into it in the last meeting, and so I said, "Can you come back on function?"
Yeah, no, it's no problem. I actually threw it back to you guys and Sharon. So essentially, if we're going with the average increase, across the 71 communities that have already had to do this, there was a 46% increase in value for their utilities, which would be for us about 8.8 million. And so essentially that would bring in about 175,000 in additional revenue. But because we know that we're not, most of the communities I've talked to, the utility companies have only paid 50% of their bill and are intending not to pay the third and fourth quarter. And with personal property, you only have to pay 50% of your bill if you apply for an abatement and bring it to the appellate tax board. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to get about $75,000 less in revenue than once thought. So the overlay won't be much of an issue after I thought about it more and threw it around, because if we're not getting the tax dollars, then we have nothing to refund them. If we lose, they'll still owe us money. So if they only pay the 50% of their personal property bill. And we had talked that it could be in litigation for, anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
And
so
while they are paying 50%, are they paying the other 50% into an escrow account? And then
no.
So then, like 3 to 5 years from now, if the state Supreme Court rules in favor of the towns and the utilities suddenly owe, whatever, $100 million in back taxes to all the towns, they're just expected to just pay that.
They're expected to pay it, and they would. I mean, I've seen it happen. But generally what happens is they waive the interest. It's almost like a settlement in a way. So they ask the towns to waive the interest. We waive it because we want our hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
So, that's basically going to be what's going to happen.
Okay. But ultimately, the effect will be that the town's total valuation will go up because it's going to be based on whatever the new valuation is, and that is going to be used to calculate the tax rate. So, so it will be good for the tax rate, but in terms of the actual revenue stream, we will most likely be taking in about $75,000 less than we expect to.
No, $75,000 less than we originally get.
Than we were.
So they right. Yeah.
And so that will cause a short-term revenue cash flow crunch at least for 3 to 5 years. But
isn't it worse than that though? Because if the denominator is higher, then that, as Steve said, reduces the tax rate. So then doesn't every household also pay less?
Mary Wolf had this exact
Mary and I talked that out, and Steve and I talked about that. No, that's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Because I think if you think of it this way, right? So their valuation goes up by 8.8 million. If let us say instead that somebody built a new house that was worth $8.8 million, right? And they're paying tax on that. Well, the tax rate goes down, and so everybody else in town pays a little bit less to basically offset the fact that there's a new $8.8 million house in town, right? But still the total amount of tax we collect is whatever the appropriate amount is. Now say that $8.8 million house burns to the ground. Well, the only tax revenue that we lose was the taxes on that $8.8 million house. We aren't also losing more tax revenue just because that house burned down, right?
Right.
So I believe that the only thing we actually have to account for is the reduced revenue from what the utilities themselves are actually paying. I don't believe it should affect the revenue stream from the rest of the town.
Right. And one other thing I wanted to point out is, and Steve, you and I spoke about this last week, is the overall valuation had increased essentially by what we're predicting just in new growth. And by doing that, in basically it's, let's just say that $8.8 million didn't exist. We're not getting that revenue. The tax rate, it's built into the new growth. So in addition to the 2% that we're seeing, and I think, Steve, we calculated that out and it came out to about what the new growth number is going to be, right?
Right.
Last week, yeah. So what will happen is there are homes in addition to this 2% increase, because we've had such a, call it a flush year with new growth, the overall valuations will still increase with interim adjustments. Property values are increasing. So that 2% is only what you're looking at now in your budget. That 2% is just new growth. And so if we say it's going to go up an additional, let's just say, to be really conservative, 0.5, 50%, a 0.5%, let's just say, that's going to also reduce the tax rate. So we're still looking at that. And then what we're also not taking into consideration, and I'm going on the assumption that at town meeting, the new construction law will allow me to collect data and tax through June 30th. I can include that in next year's taxes. So that's also going to be another bump in value and revenue. And then on top of that, beginning next spring, because we've now adopted Chapter 653, if it passes, that also allows me to do supplemental billing. And do you want me to just give you a very brief overview? I know it's 9 o'clock and you still got more to get through. But I can give you, it's a very simple, somebody just say right now purchases a condo at Southfield and it's worth $750,000. And they live in the property for 90 days till June 30th. So what you do is you take the purchase price, let's just say they purchased the property for $750,000. You divide that by 365 days and you get your per diem rate, which is about $39.40. You multiply that by 90 days. And what we'll be doing is sending out a supplemental bill for about, $3,500 or $3,800. So in addition to getting our tax dollars a year early, we're also going to be getting supplemental taxes as well if my warrant article is passed at town meeting for new construction. And these are assumptions. I'm assuming that this will be passed. I can't say for certain, but that'll put us in a much better position.
Do you anticipate a net gain over the 75,000 that we're going to lose?
Yes. If I believe, and I don't know if I've been talking to the select board too, so I can't remember if it was you guys. The last we met, last spreadsheet I got from Chris Canny, I added up what had been issued occupancy beyond January 1st for Southfield. And I want to say it was like $5 or $6 million. So if that passes, if town meeting votes to allow me to collect new construction, that's going to be on the tax rolls July 1 versus next July 1. So we're going to get our money a year earlier. So that will, let's just say, $5 million would bring in you know, a nice amount of about $100,000 of additional revenue. So, and then on top of that, supplemental next spring, those go out like March or April of next year. So we'll also be bringing in some of that. That won't be much. I think I did a calculation one year. It was like, you know, I don't know, $57,000. I just don't want you to think it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, the supplemental. So, you know, these things could put us in a good position. I'm just nervous to assume it's going to be past town meeting.
So ultimately, I think our denominator is going to get a bit bigger. And I think that we have been working as best as we can to get that numerator down. And I think between hopefully getting the police budget down based on the changes that we requested tonight, and then also what Wendy is saying about the growth situation and the additional tax revenues, I think that we're probably going to keep our calculated tax rate at least below 20. Even though it's at 2002 right now, I think that we can probably get on our budget model below 20. Obviously, things change rapidly right before it gets set, but I think the best that we can do is to try to get that rate down as best as we can. So I think
it gives us a better starting point next year, right? You know, and again, oftentimes when I come in front of you, I need to impress upon everybody that 59 North Main Street, those 12 single unit condos there, that's almost finished. Mills or Whitney Farms or Meadow, they changed the name on Whitney Street. That's, you know, we get a couple every year of those buildings. And Southfield is going to be complete. And then we're going to go back to a new growth number of about 125,000 to 150,000, depending on Coolidge. So, you know, right now we're doing really well with growth, and we have been, but eventually the building is going to stop and we're going to be back down to $150,000 in new growth.
All right. Does anyone from advisory have any questions or comments for Wendy? No. All right. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Daryl Beardsley from the Board of Health with a possible addition to their budget. Daryl, I see you there. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi. So originally I was going to be talking to you about a budget to support monitoring of water quality parameters and periodic testing if we saw algae blooms in Farm Pond again this year, to determine whether the toxins that they can but do not always emit are present. And then we would have to issue some sort of safety warning. So I was going to propose a budget for that. But and big thank yous to the Farm Pond Advisory Committee, because those folks have been going to all of the conferences and seminars and reading up on it. And I mean, I've been doing some work, but they have really done an amazing amount of work, including there was, I think it was just yesterday, perhaps, was a major hazardous algae bloom conference sponsored, I think, by EPA, because at that, there were so many different techniques pursued by different states and by different towns across the country that they're kind of thinking we might need to look at this again. It's unclear. I'll just give you a little bit of a feeling for it. I don't know if it's because of precautionary principle reasons that if you see the algae, then nobody should go in. That would be one approach, and that's an approach that some take. However, the couple of times that sampling was done in Farm Pond for the blooms that were noticed. The toxins were not present or were not present at a problematic level. And I don't have all that firm in my head, numbers and all the rest. However, it was determined that that was safe. However, I guess one of the questions I have is whether the mere visual noting of the bloom is enough to say, well, even if we grab a sample, maybe we won't get the toxins, but they might still be there. So we need to resolve a few more things before we can pin down a budget and whether it's worth pursuing. But I'm going to think that there's going to be maybe some monies that will come back, and maybe it's a reserve fund transfer in the spirit of when we know that we need it, we'll let you know. One of my concerns is I think if the testing could be precise, I would much rather do that than post that a bloom has been observed, nobody should swim, close the beach, for a couple reasons. We saw this stuff a lot last summer, so that could mean that the farm pond would be closed for a good portion of the summer, potentially, if it's another hot, or whatever the dynamics were that are causing these to happen more and more frequently around the country. And then part of that, on a revenue-wise stream, if there's consideration to open up Farm Pond to the lottery for non-residents to be able to come, I gather that, you know, that is a significant input into the Farm Pond budget. And I guess if we started shutting down all the pond all the time, then that would mean refunding monies, I'm going to guess. So I want to give you a little feel for it. You can ask me questions, but it's interesting that I think the conference, the very recent conference, made us do a big turn on where we thought we were headed, and it needs to be looked at more, is the guidance I've gotten from the Farm Pond Advisory folks who attended all those meetings. So any questions? Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, I mean, I think based on what you're saying, I think that this definitely feels to me more like a reserve fund transfer situation than a build it into the budget situation.
Okay.
Certainly, it may be that moving forward, as we recognize that this is going to be an ongoing thing that we have to constantly monitor, and then we will want to build it into a budget. It's maybe this is a question for you to answer also, Daryl, but in terms of appropriateness, you know, I wonder, you know, hopefully post-pandemic, when Farm Pond is generally open for, as normal and generating its revenue as normal, is this a type of thing that would be appropriately covered within the Farm Pond revolving fund, as just simply, this is part of operating Farm Pond, is you got to test the water now and then every year?
Yeah, right. The water does get tested for bacteria routinely throughout the summer. I don't know what kind of damage last summer did to the budget, because people were kept out in order to, since, you know, we had spacing requirements by the state and we had to maintain those, and that limited how many people could be there at one time. However, I have to say on that front, from what I observed, and I swim in the pond every day, not from the beach, but past the beach. And I talked to a lot of the gate guards and to other, and to the lifeguards, and then to Jeannie and others. I think there were only 2 days where all spots were filled all day long. And there were a lot of days where it was half, or less. So I think that there's capacity for others to be coming in. That's just a side comment, and that's my observations and data collecting from people just to understand how everything went. Yeah, and on the cost front, I think, I don't know if I want to make an estimate. I believe it was something between $5,000 and $10,000 is what was being contemplated. but that would include some monitoring to try to determine what water quality parameters were most influential and could we do anything about it? Because if we could identify something like help abutters, you know, use a low nitrogen fertilizer or whatever might point to, you know, something that was problematic, that would be probably the least costly approach for managing this in the long term. So that's where I think, but again, I think I need to hear more of what they learned from folks who have studied this much longer, such as places on Cape Cod have been dealing with this for many more years than this was our very first time. And whether they've been able to link together the factors in a way that we could pinpoint it and then do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, 5 to 10,000 feels like more money than the Farm Pond revolving fund can reasonably absorb. I think initially when you had emailed me, you had said it might be around 3,000. I was like, that might be an amount that the revolving fund should.
Yeah, if we were strictly testing for the bacteria and, or I mean the algae and the toxins, and it didn't happen all that often, and we got volunteers who were willing to pull the samples and perhaps even get it to the lab, which is in Connecticut, so it's a bit of a hike, you know, all those things, or even maybe with some mailing in there, but then yes, it could be more like the 3,000. But if we want to get to the bottom of it, if that's even possible, that's where I think it's going to take a bit more sampling to track what's, and then correlate conditions with the blooms.
Yeah, but I would say that for now, this seems like the type of thing that the reserve fund the reserve fund is established for, you know.
Okay. All right, so we'll handle it that way, and that also helps because if a bloom is observed in June, then we're this fiscal year anyway, and we'd need to come to you anyway.
These are the unforeseen emergency situations.
Yeah.
But does everyone on advisory agree, or does anyone have any questions or comments?
Okay.
Sorry, real quick.
Yes.
Sorry, guys. This is just for the testing. This is not for any sort of remediation.
Well, the monitoring of other water quality parameters besides just looking for the presence the presence of the algae and identifying which species they are, and then measuring for the toxins that they can generate, right? Two different things, presence of the algae and then whether they're releasing toxins or not. That would be just a testing situation, but if you're trying to evaluate, does the water have too much of chemical X in it, or is it high acidity, or whatever the things are that might be contributing to this, that would be monitoring more of the water quality parameters.
And sorry, this is a little bit tangential, Daryl, but do the abutters to the pond not have any sort of restrictions currently on the types of products that they can use on their property that could potentially negatively affect the pond?
Yeah, they do not.
Okay, thank you.
And it's very sandy soil all the way around farm ponds. That means anything that you put on the surface or into your septic system moves rapidly towards the pond. So that's why if we knew what it was, or don't use phosphated detergent, and there's plenty of alternatives out there that are non-phosphated. For example, I'm not saying that's what the issue is, but I think then it's a matter of addressing that.
Thank you.
In a non-painful manner. And they're concerned. The abutters are involved as well. Friends of Farm Pond. There are people who've been helping with identifying when they saw it so we could get out there and sample. So they've been great. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you much.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't warn you about that. It just happened today.
That's right.
All right.
All right, let's see. Last regular item we have here now is planning board additional warrant article. So Gino, I think you're presenting this, right? And
Correct.
I'm hoping this will be quick.
It should be, I would think. What this is when Whitney Farms was approved, the ZBA included a condition that they provide an easement for a couple of parking spaces and a connection to the old rail bed or the Upper Charles Trail. As we looked at it closer over the years, we realized that if we extended that easement further down to where the gas line crosses the rail bed, we could have essentially a handicapped accessible trail and avoid a wet area that's closer to Whitney Street. So our engineer and their engineer worked back and forth on fine tuning it. And because it's all located basically behind their stormwater management systems, so it doesn't really interfere with anything on the project. And they've been very cooperative. They were always, willing to work with us and do this extension. But anyway, the bottom line is any real estate acquisition or disposal by the town requires town meeting approval. So this is just to accept that easement that they are required to provide.
And this is a permanent easement?
It's two easements, actually, a construction easement for the construction, and it's a permanent easement for the trail ongoing.
Okay. And obviously this costs the town nothing, right?
Nothing, correct.
Sounds good to me. Any advisory questions or comments about it? Seems like one of those no-brainer ones, right?
No, Steve, if I have a clarifying question. So it's Whitney Farms, the development. We're asking for a construction easement for parking spaces and a permanent easement for access to the rail trail?
Well, the construction easement is for the entire length of the trail, just because it's hard. It's only a 10-foot wide easement. It's hard to do construction within that 10 feet. So it's a little bit wider. The construction easement's a little bit wider to allow for equipment to, work and build the trail. But the permanent easement reduces back to 10 feet.
But to Peter's question, I think the easement covers both the parking area and the access trail.
That's correct, yes. The parking spaces are just off Whitney Street. If you've been to Whitney Farms, they have that cul-de-sac that ends several feet short of Whitney Street. That's going to be it is an emergency access. And so off that emergency access on both sides, there'll be a couple of parking spaces and then a walking trail to join with the Upper Charles Trail.
And another question, I remember previous years we had a grant for $700,000 to do something with the rail trail. Was that completed, whatever we had to do?
It was 600, well, maybe it was 700,000. I thought it was 600 and something thousand. That was an earmark in a environmental bond bill. And the main purpose of that was to acquire the section of the rail trail that goes to Framingham to the north. But for one thing, we haven't had the money released, but we also, that section of rail line has not been abandoned, and CSX is not ready to sell it at this point. So we haven't been able to do it. The amount did cover our estimate of the purchase cost as well as constructing the trail, but we obviously haven't been able to do it because we haven't been able to acquire that section. We hope to in the future, but not right now.
But again, I'll just add a bit. Gino did get us a grant to complete the access trail and the rail bed once the easement is in place, which it essentially already is. So we will have access to the rail trail from the parking lot near Whitney Street. And that, I think that's out. The bids have come in, Gino, and it's been awarded. Is that true?
That's true. The section of the rail trail that's in Sherborn from roughly Whitney Street to the Holliston line was acquired with a grant back in 2011, I think. And then we have a complete streets grant that's paying for most of the trail and the parking spaces through the easement. Yeah, Sean had put all that together with an engineering firm and went out to bid and has awarded the contract, and construction will be started shortly.
All right, any other questions? All right, I think we're good. Thank you, Gino and Marion.
Thank you.
All right, and before I move on to approval of previous minutes, I do believe that this is Sharon's last advisory meeting before her retirement. So I wanted to thank you for your years of service to the town. You've been a fixture, certainly for me, since my very first advisory meeting. So thank you very much for all of the work you've put in and the guidance that you've given us in our attempts to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much, Sharon. If you're actually there right now.
I am Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. It's Natalie.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with all of you, and I wish you all the best. Get that tax rate down.
We're trying. We're trying.
I think Wendy's going to help you out with that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying.
That's right. No pressure.
No pressure at all. I feel zero pressure about it.
Thank you, Sharon.
Me neither.
We're accepting applications for junior advisory members. So you don't have to be a resident, but you have to do all the work. So I expect to see your application.
Okay, sounds like fun.
Great fun.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Really enjoy your retirement.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
This means a lot to me. Thank you.
All right, now on to the minutes. So we have February 24th and March 3rd. Mark Albers also sent me March 10th tonight, but I don't believe that has been distributed to everyone. So I think we'll push that one off to the next meeting. And I believe we're still missing February 17th. So who took the minutes on February 17th?
I think it might be me, Steve.
Okay. All right. So if you have those draft minutes, can you just send them around to everybody, and hopefully we can get those done in the next meeting. Well, it'll be sometime after the public hearing, but if you could do that, that'd be great.
Sure.
All right. So February 24th, this was the joint meeting with regional schools in Dover Warrant. Does anybody have any changes to make on these minutes? Nothing. All right, then can I get a motion to approve the minutes of 2/24/2021?
So moved.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Second. All right, let's do roll call vote. Myself, I'm an aye. Brenda Daly.
Aye.
Jane Matarazzo.
Aye.
Natalie Weir.
Aye.
Peter Galatano.
Aye.
Steve Leahy.
Aye.
Mark Albers.
Aye.
Wasim Basili.
Aye.
And Drew Kushel.
Aye.
All right, minutes passed, 9-0. All right, on to the minutes of March the 3rd. These were submitted by Brendan Daly. Does anybody have any alterations to these minutes? All right. Changes. Then can I get a motion to approve the minutes of March 3rd, 2021?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Roll call, myself, I'm an aye. Jane Matarazzo.
Aye.
Mark Albers.
Aye.
Peter Galatano.
Aye.
Steve Leahy.
Aye.
Brendan Daly.
Aye.
Natalie Weir.
Aye.
Wasim Bosley.
Aye.
Drew Kashal.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous again. All right, if anybody has anything else, otherwise I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, it is 9:27 and wait, let's all wave your hand and vote. Bye-bye, everybody. 9:27, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good night.